Welcome to Arts in Focus. I'm Emily Henry. Carrie Schaefer is a classically trained stone carver whose breadth of work includes major architectural projects, private garden installations, and freestanding abstract sculpture. A native of Indiana, Carrie attended the Chicago Art Institute before completing 4 years of training with Italian master carver Vincent Palumbo at Washington's National Cathedral. I recently sat down with Carrie to talk about his passion for one of the oldest and rarest crafts in the world. Carrie, thank you so much for having me to your studio today. I can't wait to get into this interview because your work is so beautiful. So I'm anxious to talk to you about your process. But before we get into that, I want to know when you first became interested in carving stone.
Well, I never really was interested in it until the first moment that I did it. I had come back to Fort Wayne when I was 25 after living in New York City. And I was working in retail and I hated it, and my father had a retail store in Fort Wayne, so I came back to work for him for a year. And in the midst of that, I went out in the backyard one day, picked up a rock, sat it between my bare feet and took a hammer and chisel and just banged on it, and something snapped in my head and I said, that's what I want to do. And within a year, I was at the Art Institute in Chicago, and then a few months later I was at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. So at that moment when I hit that piece of stone, it triggered some really adrenaline rush in me, and once I started pursuing it, I realized this is something I can do, and I can do it a long time, and it's not boring because it changes moment to moment. But I would have had no idea that would have been an option. If someone would have said to me, you're going to be an artist or a sculptor, you know, I was like, that was never a realm of possibility. No, I had no art background, I had nothing. I mean, you know, I liked writing. I've always been a reader, so I've always loved the internal aspect of, you know, things, thinking. And stone carving is mostly thinking. You know, you see the physical work of it, but it's mostly mental. And a lot of these commissions that I do is I get lost in the world of thought of what decision's next and what's next, and then how am I going to do that? And
so we sort of glossed over the fact that you went to the Art Institute and then literally within a few months?
Yeah, it was about 6 weeks from the Art Institute that I got invited to go to the cathedral.
Okay, so how does that happen?
Yeah, you know, you just...
I want that gig.
Okay, so that story is, and again, all this stuff was happening, it just seemed like, you know, somebody else was, you know, pulling the ropes.
Sure.
I was at the Art Institute, and I brought a piece of stone with me, and I would work on it on the sidewalk where I lived in my apartment in Chicago. And I was dinking around one week, and I thought, you know, it's the middle of summer, and I was taking figure drawing classes, and I was doing, you know, art school stuff. I thought, gosh, I'd like to have a studio someday so I can work in the winter. And that day on the subway, on the cover of the Chicago Reader, which is that free newspaper, there was an article about a stone carver who had come from Washington, D.C. to his hometown in Chicago. So I thought, wow, that guy's a stone carver. That's what I want to do, I think. So I called the Reader and I said, hey, I want to talk to this guy, his name was Walter Arnold, that the story's about. And the guy that answered the phone was the guy that wrote the article. He goes, well, give me your name and I'll have him call you. I figure, well, that's the end of it. I won't hear a thing.
Sure.
5 minutes later, the phone rings, and it's this Walter guy, and we talk, and I said, I'm, you know, just started, I'm interested in this, and can I come see your studio? And he said, sure. And so after work one day, I went to his studio, and I was just like you, I was like, walked around, oh my God. And I'd never even heard of the cathedral. And that night, coincidentally, the documentary, The Stone Carvers, was playing. He said, you ought to watch that documentary. And that was the documentary that they made, you know, about the stone carvers at the cathedral. He knew the master was looking for another apprentice. They had just raised enough money to finish the cathedral. And he said, hey, I think they're looking for an apprentice. I said, call him, I want to go, I want to come. So he called this guy, he doesn't speak English, he's only spoke Italian. And I flew out there, on a whim, I flew out and they interviewed me, and the guy, he goes, okay, you can come work here, can you be here next week? And I said, yes. And I went back to the Art Institute and I talked to the dean. I said, listen, you've taken a big risk. I never had an art class in my life. I'm now in a master's program. Right. I'm really happy here. However, I got this opportunity to go work at the National Cathedral under the last master, and I really do want to carve. He goes, do you need help packing? You can always come back here, but that literally, when they say once in a lifetime opportunity, that's not even a lifetime opportunity, that's once in a, And as it turns out, I was like the first of this group of people they hired, and people have been trying to work there for years, and they wouldn't hire anybody that wasn't Italian. And the master said he was willing to take on apprentices, and so for the next 4 years, it was the most unbelievable, in-depth, highly emotionally charged 4 years where, your learning curve was like that. I was 27 when I went, and it was just, it changed my life in every way.
Wow. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your process, because I simply cannot imagine picking up a piece of stone, or maybe not picking it up.
Yeah, I got cranes for that, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And having any idea even where to begin.
Well, that's the thought process first. So everything is contained inside that cube. So you design like I'm designing this headstone for a woman in Berkeley, and it's a regular sized headstone with a Grim Reaper sitting on it. I've taught myself how to do things on the computer, so I can build the model in the computer so that I can send it to the client and say, what do you think of this? Can you move this here? Can you move that there? Well, instead of having to rebuild a clay model, I can move things around on the computer. So it's really helpful. It helps me visualize space because I can move it around in three dimensions. I can look up underneath it. I can get on top of it and look. So I'll take that and I'll build a full-size model based upon the computer model. And once I have a full-size model and that gets approved, I look at all the outside perimeters and say, oh, that's how big of a stone it's got to be. And then I'll order the stone and by looking at that full-size model, carve it in stone. Here's I can make big cuts here and big cuts here to get that stone out of the way. You have to see inside of the stone. For me, it's as natural as seeing inside the stone as it is having this conversation. I can see what's got to go. It's much easier for me to remove than it is to build up. Like I'm going to be building a model for this next piece, and I struggle more building up the clay thing because I can move this, I can move that, and it's much more adaptable. But when I'm removing things, you got to be focused, because with stone, you don't put it back on. There's no, you don't go, oh, oops. You can't be afraid to do it, otherwise it doesn't get done. So, you got to commit, and you got to be brave, and you go. And when you're in that focus, that just works for me. So that's a very comfortable zone. You're sort of on the edge of the cliff, but you're also in control. And, so the process is that you have to think, what's next? I got to remove this plane. What's next? I got to do that. And if it's a figure, you start off with removing the most amount of stone in the place that needs it, and then go into the next place. What's the most amount of stone? And so, like, say for a figure, you would start at a high point. I would find my nose, I would find my knee, and I would cut a flat surface there. Then I might find the elbow and cut a flat surface. And then you start working on details, and then you're hanging out there, because you're looking and going, well, I'm chasing shadows, because you see things by lights and shadows. You're painting in 3 dimensions with light and shadow, because drapery is stone. It's not, you're trying to make something that looks like drapery, you're trying to make something that looks like hair or flesh. What does it look like in shadow? So that's what you do. And so you're painting in shadows at the end. And that's also another process that you just get really lost in. And there's something that's coming alive right in front of you. An example would be when I was at the cathedral and I first started, from across the room, the master could see, we would cut a flat surface, he would lay a ruler on it, on edge, and if any light shone from underneath it, it wasn't perfect. And we're talking about a 34th or a 64th, or a hair, because you can see that light. Yeah. From across the room, he could go, and yell at you from across. I'm going, what are you crazy? And I put the thing down, and sure enough, you could see it. Well, after a couple of years, you develop, so you can see such subtle shadows. So when I'm working on a piece, I'm following the light and the shadows. And so if I'm doing something around an eye, You know, if I want a shadow there, I have to know the technique to get a shadow there. So that you have to learn this. You have to not only know what you want, you have to know how to get it. And, you know, that's just trial and error. You know, you don't get a lot of chances. So it's, you know, sometimes you just go, well, it came out as good as I can get. And,
So you were absolutely correct when you picked up that first piece of stone in your dad's backyard, that this was something that you could do and love, and that just doesn't happen to people.
And I always would tell people, you know, when I was younger and, you know, I was on this incredible high of, you know, imagine being 29 years old and living in Washington, D.C., and you were at the cathedral and you were around all these other people that are miserable. And I said, you know, I know what you mean. I was miserable. You find something you want to do, quit your job and go do it. Everybody I met, I had them quit their jobs. I was like, oh no, here comes the guy who makes everybody quit their jobs. But you owe it to yourself to go find something you like. I was lucky. I looked. I mean, I found something, but I also looked. I took lots of years. I tried a lot of things. So when I hit something that I knew I didn't have a second doubt. I remember when I first quit the family business to go to art school, everybody went, how can you leave your family business? You know, I'm going, what, are you kidding me? I'm going to art school. I'm thrilled. And when I gave up that to go to start carving, people, well, how can you do that? Well, when you know, it's not a risk. You know, you gamble on yourself. I'm not going to gamble on the horses. I'm going to gamble on me. And that's, you know, it usually pays off.
Wow. You are truly inspiring. You go after it with a kind of passion that I don't normally see.
Well, you know, the thing is, it's rare to actually find something you really like to do that completely suits your every biorhythm in you. But I think you owe it to yourself to go find it.
Wow. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today. Like I said, you're just inspiring. It makes me want to go pick up a piece of stone and see if I've got it.
We can go do that. I'll show you.
Okay. I'm not going to be any good, but I'll try it.
You never know. I didn't know.
That's true. Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
having me.
Thanks.